Hi everybody. Hi. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Dawn. Today I'm going to be showing you how to grow last week's quilt. So last week I demonstrated this portion, and now we're going to dig into different scraps this week. I've got all kinds of strings that I want to use up, and this is going to use the larger strips of your strings, so you will need to find those for this project. I'm going to grow this quilt outward, and so today I'm going to focus on these strings, and we're going to go to the work table and I'll show you how. Forgive me, my desk is a mess. I've been trimming these down, trying to get scraps off my desk, and here I go putting more scraps on there. So I pulled several bags of scraps out of my string bin, and yes, I've emptied 2 bags. And I need to go through these, and I need to find ones that are longer than the dimension that I just measured on my quilt. Incidentally, the sides of my block measure 23.5. So I need to go through my scraps and find at least 4 that are that length. I have emptied out a couple bags and went through it and found the really long pieces. Now what I have got something that has a hem on it that I will need to trim this down. Can you have a string that is not perfectly parallel, the sides with one another? Yes, you can, but it may pose a problem. Like this slowly tapers down, and this is selvage edge. You want to make sure that you trim off your selvages, and that whatever you're working with, you can use it. If it's got like a jagged edge, like this has got a jagged edge, I'm going to go ahead and trim that to where I have a better seam allowance and an even seam allowance. So I'm going to trim that piece down. Some of these will need iron just because they got wrinkled up. I'm going to go ahead and cut these to a parallel type string and even some of my edges up. So originally when I did this, I started with a light print to kind of help frame it out. So I've got one there, I've got one here. This one, I didn't have one long enough to make it there, or the bags I dug into didn't have one long enough, so I went with a lighter color. Notice that I do have lots of color saturation, but I do use my neutrals occasionally to add interest. Okay, so don't leave those out. If you don't have neutrals, you can use black. Black is considered a neutral. Tan is considered a neutral. You can do this however you want. If you want to gradiate your strings and go from dark to light, that would be amazing. But these strings are yours. You know what's in your stash. You know what you gravitate towards. So do you. So if you're wondering how I'm going to trim this down, I am going to just fold it in half. What is that? I'm going to fold this in half, and these sides don't necessarily have to match. I'm going to fold it in half, and then when I line up my ruler, I'm going to make sure that it lines perfectly up on my folded edge, and then I'll trim this off, and then I'll come back over and trim this side off to make the parallel strip. Okay, so I've trimmed this down. And now here's where I start sewing my strips together. And I'm going to stagger them. So this strip measures 2 inches. So I can, when I sew this, I can come in about 1.5 inches with this one and sew this together. That way whenever, and you can also do this. You can also take your 45-degree line on your strip, lay it on there, and you want to have this come 1/4 inch past this line. Okay, so I've got this set approximately right. It makes sure it gets all of this up, and then I would proceed to fold this over and sew this together, and make sure that the length of your next piece is going to be long enough to make the edge over here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start staggering and sewing my strips and slowly go into smaller pieces. Okay, so I am auditioning fabrics for my strings, and this is just too busy and it won't work. I have so many scraps, and my yardage has dwindled to where I usually have a yard or less in all of my stash, unless I have a 108 backing or maybe a 5-yard cut. This isn't going to work because this is Effervescence by the way, and I wish now I would have bought the turquoise version because that was beautiful. But it won't work because this is like this on the other side, so I need full-on yardage. So I've got my blades done. Let me measure and see how big my squares are gonna be. Okay, I will have to cut 16.5-inch squares for my 4 corners. And I will have to cut a 16-inch strip for these string flying geese. And then this measurement I'll have to take off camera, and I'll insert that measurement here, but my ruler's not long enough. It looks like it's almost going to be 33 inches, so I'll have to cut a rectangle that's 16.5 by 30. Did I say 32, 33.5, or 33, whatever. I will insert those dimensions. If you are making this exactly like mine, if you are not, you will just take your ruler and measure how big you made these triangles. I made this piece match the size of this piece because I wanted to explode the star out. If you're doing a panel or whatever you're doing and you want to do this method, you're just going to need to take some measurements. Maybe make one of these string blocks and then cut it down and then put it up on your design wall or on your design floor or on your design bed and see how big you need to grow that. It may be that you need to add a couple strips. And I will say this, I did have a mistake. I accidentally mismeasured when I was cutting my strips to length for making them this width. I accidentally came here and did it that short. And the solution for that was just to add a couple more strips to the long side. It was not a big thing, and I have plenty of strings. So this is getting the axe. I'm not going to use this. This is Lori Holt fabric, and I'm only using this just because I don't have in my stash what I need. That's a really nice piece. It's a bolt, and I don't know how many yards this is going to take. I'll also calculate that in case you are making this exactly like mine. I will calculate how much yardage you will need for going around this with the background. Now I will be cutting down those pieces, inserting a slide telling you how big they are, as well as sewing those. Okay, so my next piece, we're still going to be cutting a 16 3/4 inch strip. This measures 16 3/4. I have just folded it. Okay, this whole strip. We now need to cut it at 33 inches. Well, how do you do that? Well, I have this folded in half. I folded it in half the wrong way. So you're going to fold the selvages and the fold at one another. Okay, so my fold and my selvages match. And we're going to be cutting, this dimension is set. We're going to be cutting on the fold, and we're going to utilize the fold to get us our 33 inches. Since we're cutting on the fold, what is half of 33? Let's see. 16 and 16 is 32. So we're going to be cutting this at 16 and a half. 16 and a half plus 16 and a half equals 33. So I have a 16 and a half inch ruler. For once, that worked out well. make sure that when I'm lining this up, it may be that you want to cut this and then recut it. You can cut it large and then cut it down after you see if it's going to work, because this is a lot of yardage to waste. So I'm using almost selvage to selvage on this. Could I? No, I have to utilize the fold. Okay, and there is my flying geese. This, believe it or not, is a rectangle that is 33 inches long. We're going to trim our 45-degree angle. And I don't have enough table to do this, so this is going to be a two-step method for me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my longest ruler. I'm going to place it on the fabric. Because we cut this exact, I'm going to come down here on this corner. And I'm going to overhang my ruler a 1/4 of an inch. And that will ensure that I'm not going to lose, actually, does that matter? I'm going to go ahead and overhang this a 1/4 of an inch. We'll see where this gets us. If anything, I'll have to trim it off anyway. This may be a perfect time for you to use a pencil or a friction pen and draw your line instead of cutting. I am going to go ahead and cut. I have plenty of yardage, so if I mess up, I mess up. Okay, and I'm going to scoop my fabric and try not to distort it. This edge. Okay. And then when I line this up on this corner, I am going to line up all of my raw edges. So this edge, and this edge. And I am going to pin, because this is quite a long seam. I am sewing on the bias, so we want to eliminate any problems. And there. And where the 1/4 inch is up over here, can you see that now? So a 1/4 of an inch from this edge, I need to have that fabric touch right there. And remember, this is a scrap quilt. We're not going for perfection. So if you lose a point, it's okay. We can press it into oblivion. Okay, I am ready to sew this side, and then I will put it up on the design wall to see how well we did for my 33-inch mark. Okay, when you press your flying geese wings, I would just press them out. It's not really going to matter. The flying geese was successful. That top block is done. I've got my 4 corners done. Now, after you make this, you're going to have to do this 3 more times. And I thought this was really going to be hard, but it's really not. I will say this. Make sure whatever print you're selecting, it's not a directional print, because then it may make this look funny. My other piece of neutral fabric I had was diagonal stripes, and that would have totally not worked with this because I would have had the stripes going on all different directions. Almost there. Okay, I only have just my final seams to put this together, and I wanted to discuss how many scraps did I make during the make of this. So any string trimmings that I cut off will still remain scrap, but because I've used them, I'm not gonna consider what I've trimmed off as a scrap because it was already counted as a scrap before. So technically I added more scraps just because of the backing. I have quite a bit of scraps from the backing. I need to tabulate, and I'll insert that here, how many yards of scraps I used in the make of this, and then what my yardage was for the make of the background. Because the background also included scraps, I need to figure out a way to measure my scraps to see if I actually offset my scraps. So I'm going to measure the square inches of this and then determine and then convert that into yards and then subtract that from the yards of scraps I've used in this quilt to see if I actually made a dent. I mean, we all know we make quilts and we toss things in the scrap pile, and no matter how much you use your scraps, you still make more. I'll put all that calculation in, and I will insert a picture here of the completed quilt. Let me turn the camera around. Did have a foobar. I don't know what I did, but this is going to be the left side, and for whatever reason this come up short, but it was fine here. So I don't know if I had a miscut on this or a pressing issue or a miscut on my background, but it's off by 1/4 of an inch, so I'm going to lose a little bit of my point, and I will try and fudge that in. But I'm going to put that on the left side because the general rule of thumb is when people stand back and look at a quilt, they look at the center and they look to the right. They don't look at the left, so nobody will even see it, except for me. Thanks for watching.